As I'm sure those who have cared about this franchise know by now, the DCEU has no future past the projects that they have already made prior to the decision to reboot the franchise. So thus we have films like Shazam, Fear of the Gods coming out, which we now know has no impact on the franchise going forward, therefore ruling it quite meaningless. But we have it nonetheless, and as of now, the DCEU is still running until we get the last few films coming out. So today I'm going to be ranking all 13 DCEU films, a video which I haven't done in over a year, I think. So without further ado, let's get into it. In last place I have Wonder Woman 1984, which felt like the only big blockbuster that seemed to come out in 2020 due to COVID. And with that, it was one of the worst films I saw of the year. The film is very ambitious, I'll give it that, but none of it works for me. There's just so many aspects of this film which I just did not like one bit. From the writing, which led to inconsistencies in the script, which led to a lot of nitpicks. You know, normally you can let one or two slide, but there were just so many to pluck from this film. The story didn't come together well. It had holes in the plot. You always have to kind of look past certain things with logic in these sort of films, but there was just so many parts where you just couldn't look past them because they were that ridiculous and awful. For a film which lets down on the story, you'd at least hope for some entertaining action, and for the most part, you don't really have that here. You know, the action is quite limited, and when it is here, the CGI is quite poor. Despite the star power, the villains were very underwhelming as well, and that just summed up this whole film. It was very lackluster for me. So many frustrating parts, therefore it finishes bottom of my list, which might be controversial given the amount of cons within this franchise. All my friends are heathens, take it slow. One of those cons being Suicide Squad, only the second film into the DCEU, and it is a mess. This film certainly is stylish, but doesn't execute it in a meaningful way. It felt more like an hour and 40-minute trailer rather than a film at points, because it was just so lazy with how it introduced things. The editing was quite off, and I know there was a lot of controversy with the editing and a lot of behind the scenes issues, and it really shows here. The standout of this film is easily Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, and obviously she was that good because she's pretty much been the only one to continue in this franchise, as well as Amanda Waller. There are so many characters and none get much development at all, and for those who do get some kind of development, it's through the laziest of expositional scenes. Jared Leto's Joker is hilariously bad, as everyone knows by now. The dialogue is abysmal at times.
So that's it? What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
The story has pacing, editing issues, and despite their best attempts, there's no real emotional value to any of these characters. Come together right now. I feel like I've expressed my opinions on Joss Whedon's Justice League so many times on this channel, but nonetheless I'll repeat myself here. It is clear where things went wrong with this film. It shouldn't have really been a film in the first place at this time. They clearly saw that the MCU was taking off rapidly with success and wanted an attempt to play catch up, and with that rushed a whole lot of things, including characters. But besides that, as it is well documented, there is a lot of issues going on behind the scenes. With two very different directors working on this project at different points in time, the film's overall tone is inconsistent. The characters don't feel like themselves at many parts of this film. The story is ambitious on paper, but doesn't feel it, as it's just breezes right through in order to get a big team up film. And the same goes for the villain Steppenwolf, who should be this very menacing presence, but due to basic dialogue and generic villain tropes just feels so bland, as well as the CGI not being that impressive. And that just goes for the CGI as a whole, because it's very jarring at points, especially with the combination of the color and darkness. It just sticks out like a sore thumb at points. There wasn't too much to enjoy. I guess it was cool to see these superheroes on screen together for the first time in live action, but other than that, a very messy film. There's no one man to have all that power. The clock's ticking, I just count the hours. I know many enjoyed this film when it first came out. They said it was harmless fun, but even as a generic superhero film, I didn't like it all that much. Your enjoyment of this film depends on how you go into it, watching it, whether you're down for just another typical comic book movie, or if you really want something special from this character. So yeah, for me, I had high hopes for Black Adam, but I just felt like they just went in such a generic route, and even with that, they didn't even execute many things perfectly. Like many times I've said in this video already, The script, the villains, the plot, very generic, weak, instantly letting this film down. I did enjoy quite a few of the action sequences, however. There were some interesting, unique ones given the power set of these new characters. It's clear that Dwayne Johnson has a lot of passion for this character and is giving it his all, maybe a bit too much passion. It's a film you can't take too seriously in the end. Even when I wasn't taking it too seriously, I still found myself not having that great of a time. Shazam! Fury of the Gods settles in with the ever-growing list of forgettable superhero films because that is what it is, and especially given that the franchise it's in has no future, it feels extra generic. The original Shazam wasn't a perfect film, we'll talk about it later on in this list, but it stood out due to its emotional family moments. It had a lot of heart in that sense. However, here they pretty much completely abandoned that in favour for just generic superhero tropes. You get the sense that they never really planned for a sequel after Shazam. They kind of made it up after that film rather than having a clear vision for it. Asher Angel and Zachary Levi, I feel like they're playing two completely different characters despite them being the same. It's created several annoying situations to watch. As for the villains, despite star power like Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu, they don't stand out, and to be honest, anybody could have played these villains and I still wouldn't remember them. There is very little to get excited about with this film, as not only does it have no relevance towards the future, but it also is just not ambitious at all. While it gets there within the final 20 minutes or so, Birds of Prey is quite a misleading film, especially with its title. The film focuses on Harley Quinn, which is not a bad thing at all. Margot Robbie is fantastic in the role, but you just prepared yourself for a very different type of film than the one we actually got. As mentioned, I love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I think she made this film a lot better than it actually was, given her charisma and just pure commitment to the role. And it provides some nice development for Harley Quinn as a character, especially moving away from the Joker. Alongside that performance, Birds of Prey thrives from brilliant hand-to-hand combat. It's very impressive, probably some of the best in the DCEU. The energy can be contagious at points, but overall it feels quite pointless and a forgettable entry into the DCEU. It's not necessarily a bad film, but it's not great either, so it kind of falls right in the middle there and therefore becomes quite forgettable. Batman v Superman has many faults, but for the most part I think I enjoy this film a lot more than other people do. It's not abysmal, it just has some poor decisions within it, but overall Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck are great in their titular roles. It was a lot of fun seeing these two characters on screen together, and the tone and action for those characters was executed fairly well. The film has some grounded elements like the conflict between the two characters, which resulted from the events of Man of Steel. It felt very realistic in that sense, and how the events of those films didn't have any consequences. You know, Superman was kind of taken to court, faced public backlash, stuff like that. I found strong elements into this film. The main flaws I had with this film: Jesse Eisenberg, who is a great actor, was horribly miscast in the role of Lex Luthor, and his performance just felt so childish and over the top that it ruined the tone at many parts. As well as there's a large portion of this film which seemed to be devoted to setting up that Justice League film which I mentioned earlier. You know, stuff like that. It just felt like the franchise was rushing to catch up with the MCU and was ultimately the downfall of the DCEU in my opinion. So many things I liked about this film, but it's a shame that it got let down by some disappointing factors which killed the franchise.
Shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity.
The best thing Shazam did was not take itself too seriously. It didn't lean too far into the campiness of the character, but it did it enough for it to be an enjoyable experience. In my section on Shazam 2, I criticised the dynamic of Asher Angel and Zachary Levi playing the same character, how they felt very different. Here it didn't bother me too much because it felt like when Billy Batson was in his Zachary Levi form that he would have felt more excited and childish because he has powers, but in that film it just felt like they took it too far. This film's very confident in itself, and that leads to some of its best moments and some of its worst. The humour is very hit and miss, with some of it even being outdated upon its release, like the infamous flossing. With such a quirky tone, the villain felt a bit too serious, and the elements that he brought into the film didn't match that tone at all. It kind of made it inconsistent in portions. Add to the fact that he is quite generic as well, like pretty much every villain on this list. This isn't a groundbreaking film, but I think it's quite a solid one because it incorporates some campy fun with some very heartfelt moments which have to do with family. It is very hit and miss in portions, but produced some of the best aspects of this universe, and I guess that might not even be saying a lot. I guess just like Shazam, Aquaman is a very campy character in the comics that has never really been taken too seriously, so James Wan made the wise decision to adapt that campiness into this film rather than making him full-blown serious. I think that pays off very well. Jason Momoa fills the role well and brings a real charisma to the character, which kind of acts as the heart of the film, which generates all the energetic campiness from it. Also, another similarity to Shazam is with its villain being a bit too serious and not matching the tone of the film. Black Manta was a good side villain and could have been a good main villain, but as for Ocean Master, he just wasn't menacing at all. Patrick Wilson felt a bit miscast, so that portion of the film let me down again for about the millionth time in the DCEU. I enjoyed the action sequences in this film as there are a lot of one takes, solid editing, swift transitions, and even incorporating a lot of colour into the mix. This film did exceed my expectations. I didn't think it was an amazing film, but I had low expectations for it and it exceeded those, so this made it into my top 5. While this may annoy most fans, whenever I think that I'll enjoy Man of Steel every time with my next rewatch, whenever I get around to watching it, I never feel too moved by it. It's a very different film to Richard Donner's Superman films. It's a different take on the character and adapted to a modern time, which I think is a solid retelling of the character. The updated modern special effects and visuals really enhanced the viewing, but this acted as a very solid foundation for the DCEU. Henry Cavill is perfect in the role in my opinion, and I, like many, were very upset to see that he would no longer be continuing, but if that's the necessary sacrifice for a new, fresh franchise, then I'm all down for it. This film is very serious in the way it's told. You know, I don't want to sound like one of those people, but there wasn't a load of fun in it for me. I found the colour palette quite miserable at times to watch. The 140-minute runtime does make it drag in portions. There were many aspects of this film that I liked, and majority of it I thought was a great decision, but I just didn't feel that emotionally connected to it like I have in the films higher up on this list. Wonder Woman was perhaps the biggest surprise of this entire list. We had this character with a very cheesy outfit from a very different time, set in World War II, and I just thought, well, how are they going to pull this off? And they managed to do that. It isn't always the case, especially on this list, that you can say the film's script is good, and I was very impressed on that front. It really held everything together, as did Gal Gadot's naive performance. The script led to efficient character development and even plot development, making for many scenes to have some tension and emotional weight to them. Despite its lengthy runtime, I didn't really feel it that much. There wasn't really a dull moment until it reached the final act, where this film kind of lets down a little bit with the CGI, the reveals. It really convolutes the story in the end, because this was on its way to being one of the best DC movies. So for now, I'll have to settle for 3rd place.
I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling around the bend.
The Suicide Squad was what the DCEU needed to get back on track, so I thought with James Gunn coming over from Marvel and applying the Guardians of the Galaxy formula to the Suicide Squad by making a group of ridiculous superheroes, or in this case villains, and turning into a full runtime of entertainment and fun. Where it differs from Guardians of the Galaxy is Gunn is given an R rating, and boy does he exploit it, providing insanely graphic and gory scenes which just thoroughly entertained. Just like in those Guardians films, Gunn executes an ensemble cast very well by giving them all necessary development and just making us have an emotional connection to a lot of them, where he even applied the Groot treatment to King Shark and made for one of the funniest characters in the DCEU. The script was highly energetic, and as great as characters like Idris Elba, Margot Robbie, John Cena were, the real standout is newcomer Daniela Melchior, as she acts as the glue that keeps the gang together. She was one of the few people I hadn't heard of when the cast list was announced, but she was a real standout in this film amongst such star power. This film delivered what many had hoped the original Suicide Squad would, by having such a fun group of terrible people do some good things. But easily in first place was Zack Snyder's Justice League. Not only is this film just an epic blockbuster, it is also better in comparison with 2017's Justice League. Every single aspect from that 2017 cut is improved upon here, and yes, the 4-hour runtime does help that, as it provides a lot more time to flesh out characters, just execute certain plots better so it doesn't feel so rushed. A big part of the announcement was that this film was going to be R-rated, and for the most part you don't actually notice that. The action is brilliant, but it doesn't seem to be too much of a gap in violence until you reach the final battle ultimately. Steppenwolf is much more of a menacing presence, which was severely missed in the 2017 cut. From the CGI, the way he looks and the way he's written, he just feels like a bigger threat than he is despite only being a henchman. The characters of Cyborg and Flash were severely underused in 2017 cut, but here they're fleshed out a lot, especially Cyborg. He's given a whole backstory, development, and just can stand on his own as a character. The 4-hour runtime may be a bit excessive, but it really hammers home that feeling of epicness. And for all the faults in the previous DCEU films with rushing this film really takes its time and could have been the start of something great with this universe. Unfortunately, it came too little too late, but nonetheless it is still my favorite film of the DCEU by far. Thank you for watching my ranking of all 13 DCEU movies. Please let me know what yours is down below, and while you're down there, if you could like and subscribe, that would be amazing. Also, let me know if you're excited for this new rebooted franchise, or if you're still fuming that they fired all of the best cast members of the DCEU. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope to see you in my next one.